Hello there and welcome to a new video in which we are going to look at how to solve a Yajilin puzzle. Now a Yajilin is a very nice type of logic puzzle and the aim of the puzzle is to create a single loop that goes all the way around the grid, visiting certain squares and other squares are shaded in and not visited. And you'll notice that at the start of the puzzle there are arrows in the grid, and these tell you how many shaded squares there are in that direction, and the loop visits every square that isn't shaded. So let's say that this square was shaded in, then that would be one of the two shaded squares that this arrow sees. And there's one other rule: if a square is shaded, then the squares alongside it must both contain the loop. So you can't have two black squares next to each other. That's against the rules. They can touch diagonally, but they can't be horizontally or vertically adjacent. And the loop must visit every other square of the grid that isn't a black square. And finally, not every black square is indicated at the start of the solve. So there could be a black square along here, for instance, even though nothing is marked at the start of the puzzle. That's within the rules. So we're going to take this solve slowly, explaining the rules and logic that can be used to solve the puzzle as we go along. So let's start with this 2. So we know from this that there are 2 black squares in these 4 squares, and remember that black squares can't touch. So this actually means that we can place them straight away with a little bit of thought. Imagine that this was a black square. Then the loop would have to visit this square, because we cannot have adjacent black squares, but then the loop would be isolated because it's got nowhere to go, it's stuck in this square. And that's against the rules because we need to form a single loop that goes around the whole grid, visiting every square that isn't black. So therefore this has to be part of the loop. And likewise, exactly the same thing applies to this square. That also must be part of the loop. There's 4 squares, we've got 2 that must be loop. So therefore we can shade in these 2 squares, and we know that the loop visits every square around them. Okay, now since the loop must enter and exit every square, if we have a square that only has 2 entry and exit points left, then we can mark them in, which is the case here. The loop has to come in there and has to go across there. It can't go there because that's outside the grid, and it can't go there because that's a black square, so only 2 options are available to it. So it goes there and comes across here, and then it must come out here. Now the loop can't close on itself because it has to visit every square of the grid that isn't black. Therefore I'm just going to put an X there to notate that the loop can't come up here, because then it will close on itself. And therefore the loop comes up here. Now let's look down the bottom of the grid. So we have a corner here again where the loop must come in and across. And we now use our second indicator. So this arrow here shows that one of these 2 squares is black. Well, we know it can't be this one. So we can shade in this square. And then we can pull the loop across here and up here. Okay, now let's look at this little corner here. Now we know that we have these 2 squares here, and if they're not black, the loop must visit them. Well, using the same logic as over here really, the loop must be able to go in and out of a square. So if this one was black, then the loop would have to come in here and would be isolated. It's got nowhere to exit. So therefore this must be loop, and therefore by the same argument this must be loop. So we can draw our loop like this. And again, it can't hit itself there, so it has to come up at least to here. Okay, so now let's look at this 3 arrow here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares, and 3 of them must be black, and we know that none of them can touch each other. So one option would be to have these three marked as black. In fact, if this one is black, then it must be this configuration because it forces the 4th and 6th placements. So let's just mark in lightly what would happen if that were the case. So this would join up across here. We'd have to take the loop across there, and we'd have to take the loop across there. Now if we did that, then you'll see, since this is sealing off over here, we now have 3 loop segments in this corner, and none of them can get out. So that would mean that they'd have to connect to each other. But 3 is an odd number, so this is clearly broken. If this were to connect to this one, for instance, then this strand would have nothing to connect to, it would be stuck, and vice versa. If this were to have gone to that one, then this part of the loop would have been stuck. So if we have an odd number of ends in a enclosed region of the grid, as would be the case here, then the puzzle would be unsolvable. So therefore we can unwind that, and we know that this square must actually be part of the loop, and therefore we can rub out these as well. That was just to illustrate the concept. Lots of rubbings out with this low-tech method of puzzle solving. Okay, so since we can't clearly have 3 of these squares as black because 2 would have to neighbour each other, then we can now mark this square as happen to be black, and that enables us to take the loop up here and the loop up here, and so that they don't connect. The loop up here. So now let's see what would happen if we had this square as a black square. Then our loop would come across here, it would have to come across there, and that would mean that this square here has to be part of the loop but is now isolated, because if the loop comes in here, it's got nowhere to go, it can't go there, it's a black square, and it can't come down there because it's connected. So therefore this also must be part of the loop. Let's rub that out. So that's loop, and now we have 3 squares, of which 2 must be black squares. Therefore we can mark both of them in. Okay. One thing some people like to do is cross out an arrow once its information has been used. So that one's been used, we've got both the 2. That one's been used, this one's been used, and in fact now this one has been used as well. So everything apart from this 2 at the top has now been used. Now with the same logic we saw earlier, we know that the loop has to come up here and down here and down there. Now this has to be part of the loop here, so we pull it through here. This has to be part of the loop, so it must go up here and across here, and that now is going to give us our second black square in this row. There's only one option left. So now we've taken all the information that we can do from the arrow squares. This must come down here, it must visit here. Clearly the loop can't come in here now, so that must be a black square. And remember that's okay because we mentioned at the start the arrows don't have to show every black square that's in the grid. That must come there. This is part of the loop here, so this must come across and down and connect in there. This now must come across here. This is part of the loop, so we must come up here, we must come there, and we must connect the loop there. So now we've almost finished. We've just got to decide, does the loop close up here or does it visit these squares? Well, remember, if it didn't visit these squares, then they'd both have to be black. And of course you can't have neighbouring black squares, therefore the loop has to visit both of these squares and come up there. And there you have it, we've solved the puzzle. So that's how to solve a Yajilin puzzle. Hope you found this solving video interesting, and thanks for watching. Bye for now.